Currently, Cuba is experiencing the greatest crisis in its history, to the point where it is no exaggeration to say that the entire national system is on the verge of collapse. Due to continued sanctions from the United States, there is hardly any electricity being supplied. Today, I will properly discuss the situation in Cuba, which is on the verge of national collapse. Let's take a look right away. In Cuba, the Communist Party Congress, set to be the first since the Castro era, has been suddenly postponed. On December 14, the presidential office said the Central Committee unanimously agreed on December 13 to delay the Ninth Party Congress originally planned for April next year. This is very significant. In fact, it's rare for Cuba to openly acknowledge the complex crisis it is currently facing. In countries with strong authoritarian regimes like Cuba, each of these events is very important. The sudden postponement clearly shows how serious Cuba's crisis is now. Raul Castro, who suggested delaying the Communist Party Congress at the Cuban presidential office, said it would be better to focus the country's resources and party officials on solving immediate problems. So you might be wondering, has Cuba really collapsed to the point where things have gotten this bad? Cuba currently can't use electricity, and the United States is enforcing strict sanctions. They can't get parts or fuel for thermal power plants, so they're unable to produce electricity at all. Without electricity, the Cuban government even ordered schools to close. They have mandated remote work for public and private sectors, except essential workers. Currently, electricity is limited to about 4 hours daily. This is actually the situation in Havana, the capital. The further you go into the provinces, the more severe the electricity shortage becomes. The Cuban Electric Company regularly warns residents to prepare for power outages. Additionally, even essential food and daily necessities are scarce. Cuba faces its worst crisis, worsened by severe natural disasters. In October, Hurricane Melissa hit eastern Cuba. This happened 2 months ago, but recovery isn't finished. Damaged houses, paralyzed infrastructure, fuel shortages, and power outages have all slowed progress. Most residents are staying with relatives or in shelters. They're facing power outages and can't meet basic needs like food, clothing, and shelter. Currently, residents fetch water from rivers or wells during the day and use candles or lanterns at night to manage. Even as it is, Cuba has long faced power shortages from low fuel revenue and old plants. But Hurricane Melissa damaged eastern infrastructure, worsening the problem. Making things worse, the country has no money. Currently, a mosquito-borne viral epidemic has spread throughout Cuba. On October 1st, Carol Peña, Cuba's deputy health minister, appeared on Gukyung television and confirmed a mosquito-borne epidemic. Remember, Cuba isn't a democracy like ours, it's an authoritarian country. An authoritarian country admitting an epidemic is spreading shows how serious the situation is. It has been confirmed that infectious diseases are spreading in 13 out of 15 regions in Cuba. According to the Cuban government, 12 people have died from dengue fever and 21 from chikungunya. There are suspicions the numbers were downplayed, so it's estimated more people died from the epidemic. Many patients there don't see a doctor or report symptoms, so it's estimated there are even more hidden cases. Between November 24 and 30, there were 5,717 confirmed chikungunya fever cases as announced by the Cuban Ministry of Health. United States economic sanctions have caused them to face a medical supply shortage. Mosquito nets or repellents could help prevent damage from mosquitoes, but without them, the disease is spreading. Since Cuba itself is struggling, the lower income class in Cuba is suffering even more. Of Cuba's 9.7 million people, about 350,000, 3%, live in extreme poverty, and the government's economy is nearly collapsing. Social welfare support for these people has been greatly cut. According to Agence France Presse News, it has been reported that over the past 2 years, there has been a noticeable increase in the number of homeless people on the streets of Cuba. Currently, the average monthly salary of a Cuban worker is about 230,000 won, but since the cost of living in Cuba is also high, with that amount you can only buy about 2 liters of milk. Due to severe hardship in Cuba, the country requested help from the World Food Program and received about 144 tons of powdered milk. This amount only covers about 48,000 children aged 7 months to 3 years in Havana and nearby areas, right? Cuba is currently suffering from such a severe economic crisis that it can't even provide milk for its children. Cuba used to ration food, giving about 6 eggs per person monthly. Now, due to a lack of funds, even egg distribution has stopped. Right now, a tray of eggs costs about 160,000 won, but a retiree who worked for 40 years only receives about 80,000 won a month in pension, so they can't even buy a tray of eggs with their pension. The national economy there has essentially collapsed. Cuba's foreign currency reserves are also estimated to be virtually depleted. The Cuban government treats various economic statistics as state secrets, so we can't know the exact amount of foreign reserves. Many Western economists believe that Cuba's foreign currency reserves have run out. In fact, there are just two reasons why Cuba started to collapse like this: COVID-19 and President Trump. Let me explain about President Trump. His administration greatly increased sanctions on Cuba, causing deeper economic isolation. Currently, as President Trump increased pressure on Venezuela, aid from allies like Venezuela decreased significantly. As a result, the Cuban economy was pushed to the brink of collapse. Cuba's main export is sugar, but even sugar exports were blocked. The United States is imposing economic sanctions on Cuba by limiting remittances, aid, and regulations, leaving the country near collapse. COVID-19 also hit Cuba hard. Tourism makes up 10% of its economy. Because of COVID-19, annual tourist numbers fell from about 4 million to under 600,000 after the pandemic. Roughly 6% of Cuba's population worked in tourism, but as tourist numbers fell, they lost their jobs. This keeps Cuba's economic growth rate very low. It recorded minus 10.9% in 2020, 1.3% in 2021, 1.8% in 2022, minus 1.9% in 2023, and minus 1% in 2024. It keeps recording negative growth rates. Of course, it's not just because of external factors. Cuba's 2021 currency reform set the dollar to peso exchange rate at 1 to 25, causing the currency's value to collapse. The black market exchange rate soared to 300 pesos per dollar, causing serious problems. Cuban citizens no longer even use official exchange offices. With import prices soaring over tenfold, the economic crisis worsens. The Cuban government has increased fuel prices fivefold and raised electricity rates by 25%. There is major public backlash. The most decisive change happening in Cuba right now isn't the protests in the streets or government announcements. It's the fact that people are leaving. When a regime truly starts to falter, the first sign is that the people decide there is no future in this country anymore and begin to cross the border. Cuba has reached this stage with an unprecedented wave of people fleeing in the past 2 or 3 years. Cubans are increasingly moving to the southern United States border, Mexico, and Florida, turning this into a structural exodus rather than a temporary trend. It's symbolic that between 2022 and 2024, hundreds of thousands of Cubans left their homeland. This number clearly shows it's not just some classes moving for economic reasons, but society as a whole is fracturing. Even more notable is who is leaving. In the past, Cuban escapes were mainly seen as politically notorious, perceived as movements centered around the ruling class, but now the situation has completely changed. Many middle-class professionals, like doctors, teachers, engineers, and technicians, are leaving in large numbers. Cuba has maintained its image as a medical powerhouse for a long time, but in reality, there are more and more areas where there aren't even enough doctors left to work in hospitals, and schools are also facing difficulties operating normally due to a shortage of teachers. The state still exists, but those who kept it running are disappearing. What this phenomenon means is not simply a population outflow. When the class that paid taxes, had skills, and actually maintained the system leaves, the state loses its ability to recover itself. The Cuban government claims the system endures. The Communist Party, military, and national flag remain. However, the reality is different. The state persists, but the people have left. This best sums up Cuba's situation. Some say it's premature to call it national collapse since the regime hasn't fallen. The fact that people risk their lives crossing seas and borders and choose not to return invalidates that counter-argument. If the system were healthy, such escapes wouldn't occur, and doctors and teachers wouldn't need to leave their homeland. The mass exodus in Cuba is more than an economic crisis. It shows trust in the system is completely gone. Before we discuss why Cuba is collapsing, it's already becoming hollow from within. The United States is expected to keep economic sanctions on Cuba. What does Cuba's future hold? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.